Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast with Will Startup, former minor league baseball player, is brought to you by Compassion International, compassion.com/sports spectrum. That is the website to go to where you can make a difference in a child's life. We're excited about our partnership with Compassion International, the Christ-centered church-based ministry. They do it right. It simply works. Over 1.8 million children so far have been released from poverty because of the great work being done by Compassion International. And here's where you come in. $38 a month. Your sponsorship provides access to school, medical care, food, vocational training, and the opportunity to know Jesus. You can make a difference by sponsoring a child through Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sports spectrum. Sponsor a child today. I promise you, you won't regret it. Today's guest on the podcast is Will Startup. Now, Will was selected by the Atlanta Braves in the 5th round of the 2005 MLB Amateur Draft. He played his college ball at the University of Georgia, pitching in the College World Series in 2004. And then made the trek through the minor leagues. And his journey from 2005 to 2014 took him through the Braves, the Padres, the Orioles, and the Tigers minor league systems. The highest level he reached was Triple-A. But Will's story is so much bigger than baseball. And so on this episode of the podcast, we talk about his journey through baseball, but even more, his life taking a turn in many ways with the birth of his son. And it's just a powerful story of Copeland, who is Will's son, and his wife Lauren's son, and just kind of going through finding out some tough news and what that's like, not only as a baseball player, but certainly as a dad. And Will shares his story of his son Copeland. This is part one of a two-part conversation with Will. And again, we'll take you through his journey. Will's really good. I really liked talking to him on the podcast, and he's about as open as you can be about the struggles and about just walking through tough times with his son Copeland and how God sort of saw him through it. So listen to part one here of our conversation with former minor league baseball player and Georgia Bulldog, Will Startup. Take a listen here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Will, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, how you doing?
Will, it's great to talk to you. Why don't we just start from the beginning with baseball? Because baseball is such a big part of your life. And tell us how you got started with baseball and what that looked like for you as a kid.
Okay, well, I have an older brother and a younger brother, and my older brother is 3 years older than me. And he started baseball a little bit later than some of kids' T-ball age, and he started around 7 years old, which naturally put me at an age where I could be the bat boy for the team. But I immediately, when I saw him playing the game, I loved it and couldn't wait to be on my own team. And all throughout just my life in baseball, I had a brother that he went on to play college baseball, so he was good. He had talent, but man, I was like his little project. We would go out in the backyard. He would squat down and catch for me. I just vividly remember he would have a glove in one hand that held a ball inside the glove and a bat in the other hand. And he would toss it in the air and he'd hit me ground balls just all the time. And I'd throw it back to him, and that's what we would do. And we had a lot of fun doing that. So we grew up in Florida, and I think the competition level there, we were in a very small park. But of all things, I grew up going to church and playing T-ball with Daniel Murphy. So,
of course,
I mean, just this small ballpark that had 4 teams. And I was exposed to some really good talent. And then my family, we moved to Georgia when I was 10 years old. And the town that I grew up in was Cartersville. And, man, we hung together as a family. The baseball team felt like a family. My sophomore year, I was able to play varsity, and I was, left-handed pitcher, a little bit of outfield, a little bit of first base. But, man, we wound up getting put out in a heartbreaking fashion in the second round of playoffs. And I just remember that taste in my mouth. And from then on, I started to train really hard in the off season. And that led to some more high school success. God opened the door to allow me to play at the University of Georgia. I got some experience as a left-handed pitcher my freshman year in the SEC and didn't blow anybody's doors off, but did okay. And then, my sophomore year, we wound up going to the College World Series, and I think I got some exposure that way and continued to open some doors. My junior year, I would consider a huge failure in what my expectations were. We didn't even make playoffs that year, but God still allowed me to get drafted by the Atlanta Braves, and I started my professional career, and man, just had a lot of fun, a lot of early success. Met shortly thereafter by an arm surgery, and God, I know we'll probably get to talk about this a little bit later, but God taught me some incredible lessons in my professional baseball career. And that's just kind of in a nutshell my baseball career.
You end up getting selected by the Braves. We talked about that in the 5th round of the 2005 MLB Amateur Draft. I'm guessing at this point in your mind, because just from an outsider thinking, it's not a matter of if, but when, as far as reaching into the big leagues at that point being drafted by the Braves in your mind. Is that fair to say?
I don't think I was as naive to think that being drafted, I would get to the big leagues. I knew that there were some odds in my favor. I was a left-handed pitcher. I threw right around 90 miles per hour. So, I wouldn't be considered a soft throwing lefty, but I also wasn't a flamethrower. But I think much was yet to be seen how I would perform and handle professional competition before any kind of ideas started coming into my mind that, oh yeah, I am destined for the big leagues.
I guess over the next few years, you reach Triple-A fairly quickly in your career, and then it still doesn't happen. So take me through the sort of Cliff Notes version of your pro ball career leading up to, say, 2011, 2012, when a bigger thing happens personally that we're going to talk about in a second with your wife and your son, I should say. But take me through the sort of the Cliff Notes version of your pro career coming up to around 2010 or so, the first 5 or 6 years of being a pro.
Okay, well, this is about to be a pretty quick roller coaster. So, This is what happens. I get sent to, of all places, my first stop in professional baseball, the Rome Braves in 2005. That is 30 minutes from my house that I grew up in. It's where my brother played college ball at Shorter College, which is now Shorter University, but that was in Rome. My fiance at the time, who is my wife now, her family was from Rome. I mean, just all these things were happening. And I wound up playing very well. So they sent me to instructional league in the fall. So I'll go and do that. Pitched well there. The next season, they started me in high A, and in 6 games, they promoted me to Double-A. And this is where I was like, oh, man. And I've had one outing. I pitched the 9th inning. We wound up going to extras. I got the win in high A, and then like a day or two later, they promote me to Double-A. I wound up pitching about 25 innings, about a month and a half in Double-A, and they called me up to Triple-A. And this is my first full season, and I'm going, oh my goodness. Like what is going on, but also, okay, keep your cool. Now, what happened in AAA was the hitters were so, I would say mature or experienced that I could get ahead of them in the count. But then when I would try to put them away, they would not bite on anything. So my ERA, probably within the first month and a half, I would say ballooned to like a 5.5. And I remember having a very important phone call. I called my pitching coach from the University of Georgia, and I said, hey, no offense, but could you, all those pitches that you were calling, could you tell me, like, do you understand why we had success? Because basically I was just throwing the pitch that my catcher was calling. I mean, they had a great system, but I really wasn't thinking for myself. So I was paired up with a young catcher in Triple-A, and we just couldn't figure out how to put people away. So he said, you know what? I'm going to refer you to, he's like, yes, I do understand why we had success, but I'm going to pass you off to somebody. So he passed me off to actually a catching coach in the big leagues. And I literally got a pen and paper and had a phone call and just wrote down, everything I could. I was starting to understand. I was starting to study the game, and I was able to have success for the rest of the season. They sent me to the fall league. Didn't go so hot there because, again, I'm playing against like top prospects. But then the next year, I started getting AAA. So this is 2007. 2007, I wind up having like my best year, and I have close to a 2 ERA right around the trade deadline. And I was expecting, I say expecting, my pitching coach and my teammates around me were all saying I need to prepare to be getting called up to the big leagues. And that kind of turned my stomach, because here I was young, I was 21 years old, and I didn't really have any pressure other than the fact to just go out and get guys out. And when they said those words to me, I was like, oh my goodness, this is serious. So it wound up not affecting me in a negative way. I wound up continuing to pitch well. But the phone call came July 31st, and instead of getting called up, they traded me to the San Diego Padres, and it crushed me. I mean, absolutely devastated me. And the very next day, I remember I pitched in a day game in Toledo for the Richmond Braves, got the phone call, flew home, flew out to Portland, Oregon, and pitched the very next night at like 10 p.m., which to my body was 1 a.m.
Yeah, that's right.
And so anyway, I know that's a little bit long-winded up until that point, but that was a huge turning point in my career. I went from being like the only lefty in the Braves organization as a reliever to being put on a team where I was one of 4 left-handers in the bullpen in Portland, Oregon. And I didn't really feel important. I remember introducing myself to the manager there, and he was like, oh, okay, all right, what position do you play? And I was just like, oh.
Yeah, didn't even know who you were.
I could have told him I play first base, and he might have started me there. So anyway, it was just I just felt like exiled.
Yeah.
And just 3 hours difference. Anyway, I wound up going to the fall league with the Padres, and I wound up doing really well. And my expectations were hoping to get, a big league invite. There were some things that happened over the off season that I didn't get a big league invite. I came into camp, and my elbow just was hurting. It was not good. And we wound up spending the whole 2008 season. I didn't pitch during the season, and it wasn't until September after the season that I got Tommy John surgery. And what I learned in that process was, in my mind, I thought, Lord, you're going to get me to the big leagues, and I'm going to have this platform, and I'm going to tell everybody about you.
Yeah.
And, if I could just examine my heart at that moment and that time in my life as a 21-year-old, I can honestly say my hopes, I had always wanted to be the poster in the kid's bedroom on the wall. I mean,
yeah.
You grow up dreaming about things like that. But that was kind of my focus. And I don't want to say my faith was, an afterthought. I was just a really immature believer. Right. So through that Tommy John process, God didn't make a bargain with me. I couldn't bargain with God. God just made it very, very clear. How about you tell people about Jesus wherever I put you? And I was like,
wow.
Okay. It wasn't, I don't feel like I settled for that. I felt like God revealed that to me. And I just felt like, that's it. God's going to put me in a mission field. And I've always said this about my baseball career. You can go on mission trips, international mission trips and things like that, where you go to the location. I always felt with all the players from different parts of the world that the mission field came to me. And sorry if I get a little emotional,
no, it's okay. It's okay.
What happened was a total flip, was that I was the young guy at the higher levels. And then the next thing I knew, the Padres got a new general manager. They cleaned house. I was part of getting cleaned out. I got released. And I knew I still had a desire to play baseball. I felt hungrier than ever to prove myself. But the Orioles wound up signing me as a free agent. And they kept me in extended spring training. At first they were talking about sending me to Double-A, and they said, you know what, let's wait for it to warm up before we send you out, kind of with your new elbow. And I was like, okay. And then I remember when it was time for short season A-ball to start, they sent me as a 20, I think I was 26. I'm trying to remember what I was, but they sent me to short season A-ball.
Wow.
And so I then became the older guy at the lower levels.
Yeah.
And, man, the things that God taught me and my wife, because something I didn't mention is one of the biggest reasons, or biggest factors in my life. I have a strong Christian wife, and we got married, after my first pro ball season. So I got married at 21. So we did my whole career together. And, man, she believed in me. She encouraged me every single step of the way. And God placed young guys, and this is with the Orioles, young guys in my life. He kind of gave me a player that was further ahead in his faith to kind of lead the way, to kind of show me an example. And he placed younger guys in my life, non-believers, and he gave me an audience to share his gospel. And so, of course, did I want to be in Double-A? Yes. Did I want to be in Triple-A? Yes. Did I want to be in the big leagues? Yes. But I was so clear on where he needed me to be. So that was 2010. 2011, I go back to the Orioles. They re-signed me. And it was weird because they started me in high A, which was great. But then at a certain point, they dropped me down to low A. And I was like, for the first time in my career, I was like, whoa, we're moving in the wrong direction.
Right. Yeah. You're getting older and you're going backwards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a big part of my story, as I'm recalling, is yes, my wife and I, we had a son. So we had him in 2010 in October. So 2011, I'm a brand new dad. We're brand new parents, and played pretty well in 2011. But I had a line drive break my hand to kind of cut my season short in the month of August. So I didn't know kind of what my future held. I just knew I needed to heal. And so the Orioles signed me back. And I go into spring training. Now, here's the funny thing, and here's a little look into spring training. All organizations do it differently. With the Braves, Dayton Moore would drive around on a golf cart, and he would point to you. And this is like you did not want the point and go take a golf cart ride. That meant you were probably done. And that was spring training. With the Orioles, I believe they left, things in your locker, or somebody come tap you. No, with the Orioles, this is where my first big key was. My coaches stopped making eye contact with me. And I was like, man, that is really strange. And I'm not getting a good vibe. So I made it all the way through camp to like the last day. And then on the last day, they called me into the office. Hey, Will, we like you. You know, we just don't have a spot for you. We wish you all the best. So again, I was at that point. What do we do? And I went home, continued to throw, and I got a phone call from the Sugarland Skeeters. And this was a new independent ball team. And I was like, you know what? I just need a time extension on my career that's not an affiliate, but, you know, some people get called from there into affiliated baseball back into the minor leagues. So I was like, hey, let's go there.
Yeah, you're just staying active. You're throwing, you're pitching, whatever,
Exactly.
hoping somebody would see you. Yeah.
And, man, I tell you what, and you'll hear a lot of people say this. I was in a great league, but these are guys that really want to play baseball. They're not getting paid a lot. And if you don't want to be there, if they didn't want to be there, they would go home. Yeah. We made the most of it. We had a brand new baseball park, which was phenomenal. Living out in Sugarland, which is close to Houston, was phenomenal. So here we are with our family. And again, I am probably having some of the best pitching success I've had. And there's big leaguers sprinkled, former big leaguers, people trying to get back to the big leagues, all sprinkled throughout the teams. And things were going really well. And I remember we were coming back from Southern Maryland, and we had a rare off day. And so we were like, you know what, let's go to the mall in Houston, and we've got buddies there, so we're going to go catch the Astros game later on. And this is the day that my world changed forever. I just remember getting a phone call while I was in the mall. And, you know, it's kind of tough to speak of the details, so
sure.
I probably want to be general with this, but
it's fine.
The news that I received was basically from my mother-in-law. She called me and she just said, Will, Copeland has passed out. You need to get home as quickly as you can. You need to get on a plane flight and you need to come home. And it felt like everything went into a vacuum and somebody hit the slow motion button. And I still remember my two friends walking ahead of me, and I just had to hold on to their shoulder. It just felt like everything was slowing down and I didn't know what was going on. And from that point on, that day, I believe that was June 12th in 2012. Maybe it was June 7th. But from that point on, God placed the right people for me in my life. I still remember that plane flight flying home to Atlanta was probably the most anxiety I've ever had in my life.
Do you even know what's happening at that point? You don't know the severity of it other than your son passed out? Like, that's what's happening, right? You haven't been told all the details yet, correct? Or did you have an idea of the details?
It hit me on the way. Like, my friends flipped into hero mode. We went right to the parking lot. They drove me right to the airport. The crazy thing is, the flight that I was trying to get on, it was 5 minutes before it took off.
Oh, wow.
I remember at the counter saying, this is an emergency and my son is in trouble. And they said, hold on, let's see what we can do. Turns out that the flight was delayed somehow. And I just remember getting on that airplane and it's strange how in a sea of people you can feel alone. And I remember sitting in between two men and just thinking, like, wanting to cry, but also thinking they have no idea what's going on with me. and hoping that I could fall asleep. I do remember when I was at the airport, my phone died, everything. I was asking for a charger, but I remember calling my mother-in-law back and asking. It was just so weird to ask this, but I had to ask, I just had to ask, like, is he alive?
Right.
And, man, yeah. And I don't know if my son will hear this, and I want to be, just sensitive of that. So that was tough. So that's about the details I feel comfortable talking about there. But when I got back to Atlanta, here's the other thing. My wife had gone to Liberty University because she was doing her master's, and she had been doing most of it online. But this particular week required her to do an intensive for a whole entire week at Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. Right?
Yeah.
She was in Virginia when she received this news. I was in Houston, and she could not get a flight out. And so she drove.
So Copeland was with your mother-in-law?
He was with my mother-in-law.
Okay.
It was just one of those things where everything was normal. And she asked if he wanted, she was holding him. Do you want to get down? And he said yes. He could talk. He could walk.
Sure. Yeah.
He's 20 months. He's 20 months
2 years old, right? Yeah.
Right. And he just passed out. Yeah. So
your wife drives from Virginia? She just gets in the car and goes?
Yeah. So the paramedics showed up and for Copeland, and they wound up taking him to hospital, but they said we've got to med flight him to Atlanta. So helicopter ride for him. We all show up, and man, I am just so fortunate that my son's alive.
Yeah.
And when I tell this story, I also want to be sensitive,
of course,
to, maybe parents that aren't so fortunate.
Powerful stuff there from Will Startup, the former minor league baseball player and Georgia Bulldog pitcher. And that was part one of our conversation with Will. And part two, which will be released tomorrow, we talked to Will about just the aftermath of walking through that difficult time with his son Copeland, and then also get into a little baseball. Will never made it to the major leagues as a pitcher, but he did make his major league debut in 2018. We'll explain what that exactly means. Part two of our conversation with Will Startup tomorrow on the Sports Spectrum podcast. We thank you so much for listening, and we thank Compassion International for sponsoring this podcast. We always talk about Compassion, such great work they're doing across the globe, releasing children from poverty. $38 a month, you sponsor a child, and you make a difference releasing them from poverty. You can give a child hope by sponsoring them at compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Sponsor a child today. I promise you, you won't regret it. Thanks for listening. You can always reach us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Of course, you can email us directly. Jason@sportsspectrum.com is my email. And we also want to encourage you to subscribe to the Sports Spectrum magazine, and you can do that by going to sportsspectrum.com. It's just $18 for an entire year, which is basically less than $2 a month. $18, and you get our quarterly magazine, 4 issues. You also get a couple bonus issues in there too. And it's a great tool. It really is. The magazine, it's really well done. And I work with the guys who work on that magazine. There's a few articles in there that relate directly to the podcast, which is neat. But it's $18, and you can get the magazine. You can read it yourself. You can get it for someone else, maybe a student, an athlete, a kid from youth group, a men's ministry, something along those lines, even just a sports team. This magazine is a great tool to do just that. $18 for the year gets you the Sports Spectrum magazine. Can't recommend more that you subscribe to Sports Spectrum magazine. I think you guys will love it. Just go to sportsspectrum.com, and right on the bottom right there, you'll see it says subscribe. Just click that button and you're in. $18 for an entire year. You can't go wrong there. Go to sportsspectrum.com. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time for part 2 of our conversation with Will Startup here on Sports Spectrum. Have a great rest of your day.